Could you imagine living in a world without colors? It would be like eating food without any flavor. Sure, you can get by on it, but why would you want to? It's a bland, boring, purposeless existence, suitable for animals but not for humans. Humans need something more. Humans need spice in their lives. That, my friend, is why we turn to art. Before I found art, my life was utterly unbearable. I was an animal in human form, seeing in monochrome and eating grass. No point to any of it except prolonging my meaningless existence. The need for more was still there. Like most other people, I was missing something vital. Do you know what I mean? Alright, don't try to answer that. Here's the real challenge, though. It's hard to find something when you don't really know what it is that you're looking for. We all go through life looking for the missing piece that will fill our emptiness, but many of us never find it. So it was for me. I tried filling the hole with money, sex, alcohol, drugs. All any of it did was increase my hunger. I could find no real joy in anything. It was a pitiful state, and I'd still be trapped in it if were not for art. I was lucky, you see. Unlike most people, I tripped over my missing piece while I was stumbling around in the dark. It had taken me completely by surprise, but when it happened, there could be no doubt about what it was that I'd found. I had found him, and with him I'd found my purpose. I'll bet you're starting to think I'm crazy. Just listen, I'll do my best to explain. Though it was over a decade ago, I can still remember that day clearly. It was back when I was in college and I'd been up late in the library, trying fruitlessly to cram for a test I cared nothing about. I was walking back to my spot with an armload of books when I noticed an ancient-looking newspaper laid out on one of the tables. My curiosity piqued. I stopped to examine it and was awestruck by the photo on the front page. I don't remember the headline. Perhaps I'd never read it. I hadn't needed to. What I was staring at was a glorious work of art, the magnum opus of a great mind. The genius of it, the arrangement of the piece, the expression captured on his subject's face, the perfect placement of every masterful stroke. It all harmonized together into a symphony of beautiful humanity that played through my mind. There just aren't words to truly do it justice. As incredible as it was seeing the piece through the black and white photograph, though, I knew that it was only a shadow of the real thing. An element was missing, something essential. Without it, the work was incomplete. I had to see the real thing, so I sought out the master who had created it. Not in a literal sense, you understand. Cruel fate had decreed long ago that we would never be able to meet in person. Nor would I be able to lay my eyes upon his original work. It had been destroyed long ago, along with its creator, by self-righteous men incapable of understanding it. What, though, I ask you, is a meeting of two people besides an exchange of information? We exchange our names, our hobbies, our likes, our dislikes, our experiences, and numerous other bits of trivial data that eventually add up, allowing us to know each other. Could not that same data be obtained without a meeting? Could I not learn who he had been, and what had made him tick by having a conversation of sorts with his memory? And once I knew who he was, would I not be the most qualified to carry on his neglected legacy? To that end, I greedily devoured every scrap of information I could find about him, even as starving men gobble up the smallest morsels of food with gusto. Anything that would contribute to an ever clearer picture of who he was. I found every little bit of it endlessly satisfying, and there was plenty to find. Newspapers, books, documentaries. He had left his indelible mark on the world. I squeezed each source like an orange for every drop of juice it would yield, and eventually I found that I knew him better than I even knew myself. I was ready to continue his work. The first challenge was to obtain my tools. What is a painter without a brush? A potter without his wheel? You may be surprised to learn how expensive an undertaking art can be, especially when all of us artists are supposedly starving. As they say, but we somehow manage. A true artist will do anything for their craft. I dropped out of college, got a job, and acquired my workshop piece by piece. My next challenge was in finding suitable subjects for my pieces. I was surprised to discover that it was difficult to find people who were willing. Most people were strangely resistant to the idea of being a subject for my art, and, given my complete lack of experience, I really couldn't blame them. After all, who wants to be immortalized in art that isn't good? As I said though, an artist will do anything for their craft, and soon I was having no trouble finding subjects. With practice, I slowly became a master in my own right, and, in the back of my mind, I had him there to guide me every step of the way. It was as though he were speaking to me, working through me. He influenced every decision, every movement I made. Pose the subject like this. Turn their head like this. Wait until they have the right expression. There it is. He told me where to draw my lines, how to let the colors burst out from where they were trapped within the unremarkable canvas. Such beautiful colors. Whites and pinks, yellows and browns, blues and purples. All of it coming together in a bouquet of indescribable beauty. Of these colors, my favorite has always been red. The color of passion. The color of sacrifice. The color of life. With each line I drew, it gushed out readily, eager to show off its brilliance in the light. It spread outward from the subject, sainting them within a ruby halo. You are growing restless, I see. Sit tight, I'm almost finished. I just want to help you understand. After I complete every piece of art, when I gaze upon what I created, I feel what my master must have felt all those decades ago as he looked down at his own work. There is truly nothing like it. Seeing a masterpiece that you have created with your own two hands. It was Emerson, wasn't it, who said, "To be great is to be misunderstood." Well, my master had been misunderstood in his time, as I'm misunderstood in ours. But he never let it stop him from trying to help others to understand. I will not allow it to stop me either. I keep working because somewhere out there in the world, perhaps now or maybe 100 years from now, there may be another who beholds my art and sees what I see, who sees what my mentor saw. Perhaps it will give their life purpose as it did mine. Well, anyway, that's all of it. Are you ready? Noah, hush. Hush now. You're afraid, but that's natural. It's just because you don't understand. Stop struggling like that. You're gonna bruise your skin. Patience. Give me a moment to sharpen my tools and then we'll get started. A little bit of fear and some pain, but it will all be worth it, I promise. I'm going to make you immortal. It was a trite scenario. Something so overdone that it managed to be both boring and ostentatious at the same time. The middle of a road leading to two opposite places, the forest or the hills. What'll it be? High sun over the hills or shadows dancing in the forest? Whistle of sharp wind grazing the peaks of the hills or two-bit chainsaw echoes within the forest? What'll it be? Elevation or seclusion? A higher grace or a darker enigma? What path will lead you to your best self, your best life? What'll it be? What a crock. It wasn't a magic sign. It wasn't some metaphor for life. No, that's just how it went when you found yourself all by your lonesome in a valley. You were always in the middle of two things. Two landscapes, two temperatures, two clouds, two sounds. Sounds were like mosquitoes, buzzing loud and quick, leaving no trace of where they actually landed until they'd already ripped into your skin and left behind itching, burning poison. Keller leaned against the hot metal of the Cadillac, gazing out into the dull sky and brooding over this. Valleys were a lot like hollers. Keller had grown up in dirt-poor hollers clear across the country from where she stood now. All in all, valleys and hollers were just drop-offs, wannabe holes dragging down the earth, confusing anyone's senses who entered. Whether it was Virginia where Keller had come into the world, or Idaho where she was now, it didn't make a difference. Two-stroke chainsaw magnifying in volume beyond those dying pines. Keller hated that bladed monster just about as much as she hated valleys and hollers and the never-ending two different ways to go scenario she kept finding herself in. An alarm beeped twice, faint, from her hand. She looked down to see the 1% keeping hold on her cell phone's life fade out completely. Black screen. black mirror showcasing a new, tiny reflection of Keller's face. She looked as tired and moody as she felt. The air got quiet then. No more chainsaw. Relief flooded through Keller and she slowly got back into the car, wiggling uncomfortably behind the giant steering wheel. A little natural noise she didn't mind. But human-made sounds were always unnerving, especially when you couldn't immediately see the source. Dead silence wasn't a welcome song, either, as it usually signaled only one of two things: the aftermath of something terrible or the waiting for it. Keller put the old, beautiful heap of automobile into gear and pulled onto the hot tarmac, relishing in the blowing dead air that posed as the 1977 Eldorado's AC. Maybe she was just being sensitive and dramatic about the whole dreaded sounds thing. After all, she had used both sound and silence to her advantage less than 48 hours earlier when she'd killed Andy. She'd stalked him quietly for weeks before, and truly thought the murder itself would be carried out just as quietly. But Keller hadn't banked on Andy killing her best friend in the moments before it was his time to die. Homicide is a fickle thing. Anyone who's ever watched a true crime documentary or a slasher movie knows this. Keller couldn't for the life of her understand why she'd thought it would be any different in her own situation. The whole point of killing Andy was to get him the hell out of his wife's life before she was the murdered one. Andy's wife, Malin. Keller's best friend, Malin. The well-renowned former astronaut/scientist Malin, who had a beautiful line of accolades following her everywhere she went. When people said her name, Malin Boudreau, they corresponded it with all those insurmountable, brilliant achievements and skills. No one ever said Malin Boudreau, beaten and battered wife of a real loser. Keller clutched at the cracked leather that wrapped the steering wheel, enjoying the way the frayed strands prickled her clammy hands. She clenched her teeth together, stared straight ahead as she drove towards her decided path in that moment. Up to the forest. Anything remote was welcome. Any old forgotten place would do for Andy's chopped-up corpse. She was ready to dump him off already, get him as far away from Malin as she could finally. Keller swallowed down bile back into her gas station coffee-coated stomach for the millionth time since she'd started this wild drive. She didn't give two shits about dead Andy. Nah, that didn't make her nervous one bit. It was what she had to do after. Doing right by Malin, respectfully giving her the send-off she deserved. Malin Boudreau, the one-of-a-kind, too-good-to-be-true human in this world that everyone marveled after. That's how she had to be remembered. That's why Keller had had to bring her along on Andy's disappearing act. That's why the world would never know what a monster Andy truly had been. No justice would exist because the truth wouldn't. Malin didn't deserve to be dragged down with her torturer. Keller scoffed at herself. She was no martyr. No greatest, all-sacrificing best friend here. She wasn't going to kid herself that she was as good of a person as Malin had been. Hell, if Keller hadn't run off to the big city to escape the wretched Virginia holler in the first place, maybe none of this would have ever happened. But she'd abandoned her best friend. Left the person she'd grown up with when she had needed Keller the most. No, Keller wasn't looking for her own laurels. Killing Andy, preserving a golden legacy for dead Malin, was the least she could do for turning her back on a shit show that had become a bloodbath. Well, originally there wasn't supposed to be any bloodbath. Malin would have been proud of Keller's nerve. She'd chosen a symbolic way to take Andy out, something almost poetic. Loss of complete will, complete power. Keller hadn't totally thought the idea up herself, though. Fate had intervened casually on the television one Tuesday afternoon in the background, as Keller had waited on her Starbucks order at the counter. Scopolamine, a seemingly innocuous drug for motion sickness, could be rendered a most dangerous poison if an overdose was administered, turning the receiver into something of a literal zombie. A weird numbing of the brain that brought upon lack of will and a bot mental state in which the overdose party would do whatever he or she was told. The television at the Manhattan Starbucks was circling through the daily news, and a brief story ran about a man who had used scopolamine to aid in killing his wife. The details on how this man had actually done the murder itself hadn't mattered to Keller. because the beautiful thing about the scopolamine was that Keller would be able to choose whatever happened next. It was a godlike power that Keller could exercise, giving the necessity of what she would have to do deliciously satisfying in its own way. And boy, had it been. Keller smiled in spite of herself as she reminisced killing Andy, temporarily fogging away from the slow drive she was making up the valley and towards the forest. The perfect accessory to murder would lend itself in the form of a lactose-unfriendly casserole. There was always this weird, cheese-laden corn casserole in the fridge at Andy and Malon's house. It was Andy's favorite food, and a broken nose or busted-up clavicle might ensue upon Malon if that Frigidaire was ever vacant of a giant glass baking dish of it. Keller had a key to the house, another perfect accessory. She'd had it for years. Malon asked her not to tell Andy, so he never knew. Everything was easy. Getting into the house, poisoning the casserole, which had been fresh, by the way. Watching it all unfold through the overgrown hedges by the back window easy. Andy and Malon lived on a sprawling 10-acre lot, so neighbors, witnesses, were not an issue. It took less than half an hour for the drugs to hit Andy full force. He was at the bottom of the staircase when Keller walked inside. She remembered looking down at him for a good 60 seconds, studying the way his limp body rested at an odd position on the stairs. His ass plastered at the very bottom, and his head 3 steps up. Andy was a big guy, tall, stocky, making it all the more cartoonish of a scene. The chainsaw was revving up again, but it was louder this time, and it was right next to Keller. She slammed on the brakes and whipped her head around to look at the empty passenger side of the car. Only it wasn't empty. She muttered the most offensive, albeit creative, expletives to the fresh, unexpected specter now sitting beside her in the passenger seat. Buckled up and holding a vibrating chainsaw was Malon. She stared down at that chainsaw in her hand, smiling slightly at the rapidly gyrating belt. And then, just as quickly as the chainsaw had revved, it disappeared from Malon's hands, and she looked over at Keller, her long blonde hair swinging over her small shoulders. Malon didn't say anything. Neither did Keller. What was there for Keller to say? What the hell are you? Why are you here? Your dead body is in the trunk of this classic peach clunker. So I know you're just a figment of my murdering imagination? How's heaven? Or hell? Or why the fuck do you have a chainsaw, Malon? Keller looked ahead out the front window. She moved her foot from the brake to the gas and turned the steering wheel just enough to pull the Cadillac out of the road and onto the weed-covered shoulder. She put it in park, looked over at the passenger side seat again, expecting to find it empty. It wasn't. Malon was still there, glistening barrel eyes, like she was about to cry. Malon had always been a crier. Total opposite of Keller, who they'd used to joke didn't have tear ducts. This wasn't real. Keller wasn't so delusional. Yet, there was an almost annoying symbolism in everything. The along-for-the-ride apparition Malon opened her mouth to speak. No words came out, but Keller didn't need words. She knew the disappearing chainsaw had been a direct allude to what she'd had to use to dismember Andy, so that she could fit 2 bodies and corresponding evidence, i.e., a big-ass suitcase packed for a fake leave-it-all-behind scenario, in the trunk. The sound of the 2-bit coming from God knows what direction from earlier. Not real. Another mirage of sound. Keller looked away from Malon at her surroundings outside the car. She was thankful for a faux chainsaw. It meant the forest was as deserted and alone as it looked. No humans. Hopefully animals to devour Andy, but no actual creatures that could use a phone to call the cops. Keller caught a glimpse of an especially thick area of brush and trees and overgrown goodness. She stared at it for a moment, then turned the car off. This is where she'd dispose of Andy. The sky was undeciding and bleak as ever, but it had grown darker, so Keller assumed it must be nearing late evening. Between her dead cell phone and even more kaput car clock, she couldn't be sure. Keller got out of the Cadillac, walked around it, walked up the road a bit, walked back. No one was around. It was safe, and it was time. Keller had thought about going full Breaking Bad and just sloshing Andy's body in a vat of muriatic acid so she wouldn't have to dispose of anything. She also wondered if today's serial murderers used pop culture TV as much as she had with this killing. It was inevitable, right? But just securing the scopolamine alone was enough risk for Keller. That meant muriatic acid was out. So now here she was, about to dig a 9-foot hole. Not a 6, a 9. Maybe an 11 if the last cup of coffee kicked in at the right time, and she was only going to throw some bits of Andy in it. Then she would dirt it back up. Then she'd do it all over again, perhaps 5 more times. 9-foot holes were nothing in the scheme of things. The bigger picture was successfully hiding a monster forever, so that everyone back in Virginia would always believe the note Keller had left behind. The one that would be presumed to be in Malin and Andy's words. There was no dispute about the time of day. It was once Keller was finished hours and hours later. It was dark out, nearly pitch black, except for an eerie moon right out of a horror film. When she walked back to the car, breathless, but surprisingly barely dirty, another quip out of a horror film greeted her. 2 crows on the hood of the caddy. Crows. Keller found this curious, not unnerving. Maybe because she realized in that second that she'd never actually seen a crow in person before. She closed her eyes, shook her head, opened them again. The crows were gone, and Keller smirked knowingly. Just another figment of her imagination brought on by all this bullshit traumatic mess. Her brain really was taking her for a ride today. Keller got back into the car, breathing a bit easier, but now faced with 2 ways to go as usual. Ghost Malin was in the passenger seat again. No chainsaw this time, that was nice. Keller turned the key in the ignition, glancing down at the black screen of her cell phone that rested on the center console. She didn't know why. Of course it would still be dead. She looked up at the rearview mirror, straightened it, and threw the car around suddenly, nearly taking it on 2 wheels and leaving a deafening screech on the pavement as she headed back in the direction she'd come. The way of the hills this time, and despite the phantom just to her right, Keller found her mind wandering off again within seconds. Standing over Andy's drugged-up state on the stairs hadn't brought upon any hesitation in finishing the job, but Keller had found herself wanting to just stand there and stare down at him forever. The tyrant had become the helpless victim. Oh, what a beautiful scene. When Keller had finally snapped out of her own trance, she'd kicked Andy in his side until he came to. His eyes were glazed over like a pair of hot, dripped donuts, but he was still mobile, and Keller had leaned down, clutched at his arm, and directed him to stand up. She tugged with all her might. Keller was stronger than most women her age, not because of a size advantage, but because she was a lifetime athlete. Along with Andy complying and shakily pushing himself off the stairs, Keller was able to get him to his feet. She gave him another order to walk to the back door of the house and out to the shed, while Keller followed behind him. Andy wordlessly did exactly that, though his lopsided trudging was so slow that it truly was reminiscent of a nearly forgotten 1950s inflated zombie culture. Keller had her hand grasped around the handgun in her purse, just in case. But they made it all the way out to the backyard shed with no resistance. Andy didn't even act like he was cognizant of who Keller was, or himself, for that matter. They went into the shed, and she directed him to stand with his back against the far wall. He had done so, still donut-eyed, staring at her with no realization that he was doing so. This is when Keller had hesitated. She had wanted to make Andy suffer. She'd been this salivating sort of angry for the last 2 months, since the last straw had commenced and Keller had finally decided to end Andy. She'd shown up as a surprise for a weekend visit to Malin, knowing Andy would be away on a business trip to leave the 2 old friends by themselves. It had been years since they'd seen one another in person. Keller had walked into a darkened home, a surprised Malin at the kitchen table. A Malin who was absolutely unrecognizable to Keller. Between her swollen-up face, to black and blue chest, to the casts on both her left arm and right foot, there was no question in Keller's mind who had done this. Malin may have refused to admit it or talk much about it, but Keller didn't need any confirmation from her. She was going to save her friend who couldn't find the strength to do it herself. She owed Malin that much after abandoning her 5 years earlier. Keller would finally be the one to give Malin her life back before Andy had the chance to wipe it out. But standing in front of this version of Andy, the one who'd been stripped of all his will, Keller had suddenly wondered which magic weapon that jingled around in her oversized purse would be best to use to kill Andy. The gun? Or the Drano? At this point, he probably wouldn't feel a damn ounce of pain, so shouldn't she go with the least messy? Yes. So, that's exactly what she had done, though one more satisfaction was owed to her. He would do it himself. She had handed Andy the bottle of poison and commanded him to drink it. He tipped his head back, swaying so suddenly that he nearly fell over, and drained the entire little vial down his throat. When he was dead not even an hour later, Keller had gone back into the house to leave the typed note she'd constructed to Malin from Andy. The one she'd originally planned to use that in no way had involved Malin. The one that was a fake Andy telling Malin that he was leaving her forever. Malin would never know the truth about what had happened here. Keller would never have her burden that. But something had been off in the house. As Keller had walked towards Malin and Andy's bedroom to leave the note there, a strong smell hit her out of nowhere. Rusty. Chemical. Violent. She remembered pushing open the door and falling to her knees in the kind of despair you only see in the movies that get nominated for Oscars. Malin was dead. Andy had murdered her right before Keller had arrived with her diabolical plan. But Keller couldn't see it. It was like her memory was forbidding her from reliving the trauma of discovering Malin's dead body, blacking her out. Even after 2 days in the bright-hued El Dorado, driving across the country, being inside her own head deeper than ever before. That moment, that memory, it was lost to Keller. Keller sucked in her breath and abruptly halted the car, her eyes nearly bulging out of their sockets at the sudden sight before her. Children, teenagers, families, a whole gaggle of them crossed the road in front of the Cadillac, some of the parents throwing a glare at Keller for almost running into them. Keller's eyes moved past the people, and an amalgam of colors whirled in front of her. Carnival. Keller rolled down the window just slightly, and all the senses came through. Music that was too loud, and funnel cakes that smelled so good you'd want to eat them until you threw up. The carnival. A magical fountain of youth place. The place where Keller had first met Malin decades ago when they were just 11 years old. There was an unexpected, loud squeaking noise that cut through the night, and Keller's gaze followed it. An old Ferris wheel, identical to the one from all those years ago, at the carnival where two best friends had first encountered one another. And then Keller realized something as her eyes darted around to take in the rest of the show. All of it seemed exactly the same as that carnival before. Keller realized something else then. Her breathing was shallow, suddenly coming in sharp, painful gasps. She squeezed the steering wheel so tight that she was sure her knuckles would burst through the skin. She rested her head on the wheel, tried to understand what was happening. She couldn't breathe. Why couldn't she fucking breathe? Keller's eyes involuntarily crossed. Her eyelids were heavy. She couldn't keep them open any longer. She gasped for breath that just wasn't coming, clenched at her throat, clawed at it. Her eyes were tightly closed now, anvils on the end of her lashes. A bird made a harsh sound nearby. Hawk. No, a crow. Keller didn't know how much time had passed, or why the horn of the caddy wasn't blaring, since she could only assume that she was passed out on it. But Keller's eyes lost the weight, and as her eyelashes fluttered back open, she realized she wasn't hunched over the steering wheel at all. She was lying flat on her back. No, what was happening? She internally screamed at herself to snap out of it. She was carrying out an atrocious crime. She had to get Malin's remains to northern Idaho, to the little town that was Malin's favorite place in all the world. That little town they'd come upon one summer on a random backpacking excursion. They'd been 18, It was just 6 months before Malin would meet Andy the monster. It had turned out to be Keller and Malin's last trip together. 18 years old, and wild and free and at the mercy to the magic that is to be young. No. Keller didn't have time for the reminiscing or the sadness of losing Malin. She had to keep moving. Morning would have to come after it was all done. It would have to come after. Keller's hair was wet. So were the smells surrounding her. Rusty, chemical, violent, grass. Keller looked up into a clear night sky. Tons of stars. No moon anymore. She tried to move her head. Nothing. Tried to wiggle her fingers. Nothing. Of course. She was in a delusion. A dream. Her mouth hung open. She could hear the wheezing. She could taste blood. A cell phone beeped its low battery alert from somewhere in the distance. Closer than the crow's song. That was impossible. Keller didn't have a phone charger in the El Dorado, and her cell had been dead for hours. A familiar silhouette leaned over Keller, looked down on her. Long, blonde hair framing, almost hiding the face of this woman. Something was in each of her hands. A rag. A buck knife. Something was in each of her eyes, too. Betrayal. Keller made the motion to reach up, but she still couldn't move. She tried to call out to the shadow, to Malin, through her pulsating breaths. She couldn't do that either. Keller closed her eyes, tried to will herself out of this nightmare and back to reality. She went somewhere else then, but not to the stopped car in front of the carnival amongst the hills. Keller was in the doorway of Malin's bedroom, fresh off killing Andy. She was on her knees, waving her hands out in front of her frantically, trying to grab hold of the crown molding, the door handle, anything. She was fading, the chemically soaked rag pressed against her mouth and nose, liquid dripping down her chin. She swayed, crumpled to the shiny travertine floor. Malin was crouched down, smiling and shaking her head, rag in hand, blonde hair framing her pretty face. Whips of slashes by blade through the air, striking the flesh of Keller's hands and arms and wrists, slicing into the tendons of her legs, the muscles of her stomach. And then everything went black. Keller coughed and sputtered and choked, her body heaving up in resistance every now and then as she traveled further and further away from existing. She could hear Malin's voice, full of cunning and sadness and satisfaction all at once. A strange mixture of emotions, a hard one to understand. Words from Malin's lips came from up above, strung together, yet grossly disjointed. I'm sorry, but had this coming. You don't know anything. My truth. Your truth. The truth. You left me. 5 years is a long time. You did this to yourself, Keller. Keller opened her eyes again. Outside, the backyard. Malin was on her knees in the grass beside Keller now. Her cream blouse was covered in crimson. They were only mere yards from the shed. From Andy's body. Keller opened her mouth, tried to speak again, tried to explain herself to Malin, tried to apologize, to yell, to scream, anything. But sounds became so reticent, so superfluous. Even her dying breaths were almost inaudible. Keller's eyes wandered weakly, stopped on movement on the roof of the shed. 2 crows. There had never been a second note left behind in the fake words of Malin and Andy proclaiming that they were leaving town forever. There had never been a frantic packing of a suitcase, or chopping up Andy with a chainsaw from the shed. No discreetly shoving it all in the trunk of the El Dorado. Keller was taken over then by a heave in her chest, and a vignette slowly rolled inwards until everything was nothing. Dark, silent, vibration in Keller's hand. She opened her eyes and looked down. Her cell phone was coming to life, the screen blinking and portraying the caller ID image of Malin from their college years. Keller lifted her gaze and looked around. A clear night sky sprinkled with stars. No moon. An amalgam of colors whirled in front of her, along with music that was too loud, and funnel cakes that smelled so good, you'd want to eat them until you threw up. Clumps of crowds walking past Keller, bustling to the corndog stands or the next kitschy amusement ride. Something touched Keller's arm, and when she looked over, the cell phone in Keller's hand had stopped vibrating. Malin stood there, beaming. Malin pointed up to the slowly rotating Ferris wheel, just as it made a loud squeaking noise. They looked up at it, then back at each other and laughed. Keller's gaze moved to the land beyond the carnival. Flat, easy, heading towards a bridge that offered one way in and one way out. Easy. Keller glanced back down at her cell phone, up to the Ferris wheel, and then her eyes landed on Malin again. Keller held up the car keys and motioned towards the big, peach clunker waiting for them at the edge of the bright lights. Malin nodded and looped her arm in Keller's. Just the two of them. No one left to blame. What am I to do? The door to the secret passageway I found earlier has vanished. I have already tried searching for the catch with one hand, hidden surreptitiously behind my back whilst pretending to drink from my water glass. The entire painted wall is now a seamless solid panel. Access that way has been cut off. Whilst brushing my hair, I used the opportunity to toss my head around, trying to appear nonchalant, but frantically scanning every corner of the room for other ideas. In the dark gloom of the night, outside the glass doors on the balcony, I sensed more than visualized the somehow threatening outline of a huge giant of a man. His head is completely shaved apart from a straggly ponytail, and he is so brawny he does not seem to possess a neck. Huge arms firmly crossed across his toned chest, the sleeves of his pristine white t-shirt strained to cover bulging biceps. His features look foreign. Asian? Maybe Japanese? He reminds me of some kind of intimidating sumo wrestler. He has been crouching there, squatting on his haunches silently yet with infinite patience in the shadows against the wall since sunset. In all that time, his head has not moved an inch, but I feel him observing me constantly, just waiting for me to give him the smallest chance to uncross those powerful arms and pounce upon me. Under different circumstances, I might have found that muscular chest clearly suggesting a solid six-pack of pure strength rather attractive, but not here, not now. His ominous presence is too threatening, and I am becoming increasingly scared of him. The expression on the big man's face seems menacing, despite his mean features remaining totally immobile. His monolithic eyes are glued to a fixed spot straight ahead, but I know he is aware of my every move. Any attempt to escape that way via the balcony will prove impossible for sure. The solid oak door to the corridor outside this small, square room seems to be beckoning to me. Could it possibly have been left unlocked? Might that be the way out of here? I must not show any expression of hope on my face or the big man might see. There are framed pictures on the wall. Awful, amateurish forest scenes and prettily twee coastlines in weak, faded watercolors which I pretend to admire, cocking my head on one side and scrutinizing the details as I've seen people do in art exhibitions. As I examine each picture, I start gradually making my way towards the brown and black striped door, creeping ever so carefully in the direction of my longed for freedom. Wham! The big man is suddenly only about a meter away from me. He is now standing squarely in front of the door barring the way, still with those intimidating arms crossed across his chest. He is grinning at me, but in an eerily smug sort of way. At his full height, he looks well over 2 meters tall. He must have guessed my intention. I cannot retreat though. I just know that would be a fatal mistake. This is it. It is now or never my only chance. I have got to be brave. I tell myself I can do it if I really try. Words from my mum and long-gone childhood suddenly ring out from nowhere. Never be afraid of anyone, babe. You can do anything if you really want to, you know? I must keep moving at all costs, but keep it slow and deliberate. The regular ticking of the clock, the gentle, insignificant hum of the heater, the distant drone of heavy traffic speeding by on the highway outside all simply fade away to nothing. I somehow manage to swallow, hold in my breath, stretch out my hand and steel myself for the impact. There is a thunderous, pounding noise in my ears. My stomach is in knots. There is no impact. Cannot believe my own eyes. My hand reaches straight through him, directly to the handle, and I yank downwards, dragging it inwards with all the force I can muster. But it is not heavy at all. The flimsy door flies open, knocking me off balance, the frail barrier swinging around like cardboard. Beyond lies my freedom. The sound of his demented laughter suddenly ricochets round the room, sending shivers fluttering down my spine. It is a cackling, nasty laugh. No time to waste here. I have to flee. I hurtle away from that place without knowing or caring which way to run. I'm heading left, chased by the awful sound of his sinister sniggering. It is not a raucous belly laugh, not a guffaw either, but it is far from a friendly chuckle. It is the kind of gleeful, smirky snigger a cat might make if it could, when toying with a terrified, cornered mouse. Ahead lies a long, empty corridor with scores of identical doors lining both sides. Floor, ceiling, and walls are all painted a dazzling clinical white. It resembles a hospital. The thudding of my bare feet on the glacial ceramic tiles seems muffled, and I have the bizarre thought that the sound is being absorbed by the walls themselves. I almost miss a sudden turning to my right and belatedly grab hold of the wall, hurling myself blindly round the corner, both arms flailing as I recover my step. There is a staircase in front of me and I hesitate. Do I go up or down? I am too slow. The big man has leapt from the floor above and landed without a sound on all fours in front of me, his head low to the ground with both of his unblinking, slanted eyes fixated on me. They are black, predatory eyes. It is an almost reptilian stare. I am unable to look away. Like a rabbit caught in a headlight, I am powerless to move. My limbs are paralyzed. As he inches forward, preparing to pounce, his nostrils quiver. He smells my fear. I shrink away and down into myself. He lunges. I shriek. The predator has his prey. His icy fingers surround my neck in a steely grip. Some deep-rooted instinct within me awakens the will to retaliate, and I begin grappling for my life. My thrashing fingers find his face, and I succeed in raking my nails across the side of his cheek. He bellows in rage, then squeezes harder. A foggy grayness hovering at the outside edges of my vision grows darker and thicker. He jerks his hands, and then there is only blackness and silence. I swim and the world spins. An intense brightness, kaleidoscope of colors. I struggle to open my eyes and make out the familiar outline of a photo frame by my bed. This apparition of normality calms me slightly, but I am still shaking and my head is thumping. I stagger to the bathroom to wash my clammy hands and splash my face with cold water. There, I do a double take at my reflection in the mirror. Winding all around my throat is a narrow ribbon of furious, reddish-purple bruising. Incredulous, I bring up my hand to touch my damaged skin and wince. I notice my fingers. There is blood. An unpleasantly sticky mass of bloody gunge clogged underneath the nails. I suddenly feel extremely faint. Then, just as I am about to turn on the cold water tap, I freeze in dread. An icy snake of terror slithers up my spine as I become aware of a malevolent presence. I perceive a shadow in the far corner of the bathroom. It is the big man, here in my bathroom. He is crouching beside our shower in much the same position as he was on the balcony earlier, and he is smirking at me. There are now 3 angry-looking score marks running from his left ear to his nose. Terror-stricken, I back out of the bathroom and run. I struggle and scrabble with the latch to open the door to the garden, only to find it is not our garden. I find myself in a thick forest of some weird kind of bamboo plant whose tips tower high above me, entwining themselves into a messy vegetal rooftop, drowning out the sunlight. I have to breathe in to squeeze between the smooth, gigantic trunks, each one easily the size of a man's thigh. It is as if I am moving in slow motion, and the big man's insane laughter continues to echo all around me. As I try to advance further, I become more and more entangled in this impenetrable green prison. My legs are now totally enmeshed in a cluster of smaller shoots, hundreds of fine tendrils entwined around my shins. I am trapped, unable to move another inch. Help me! I scream. Help me, somebody. Please! I'm stuck. I jerk bolt upright, the bed sheet coiled tightly round my legs. Well, I suppose that explains me feeling trapped. I attempt to reason. But wait, why is my heart still pounding like that? I notice the door handle beginning to move, and with a sense of foreboding, I become aware of the big man's threatening presence once again. No, please, no, this can't really be happening. Please tell me it can't. I try to take flight, but my legs refuse to obey. Thunderous laughter erupts all around, coming closer, getting louder. The intense pressure on my eardrums is too painful. My bedroom door is opening. Here we go again. April 1st. God, oh God, I don't think I will forget. Ever. Right now, it is 12:23 in the morning. And I am awake. What the heck? I'm so tired I can barely move. But I can't sleep. For the past 2 nights, I have been having terrible dreams. Oh God, never in my life have ever experienced such terrifying things. I didn't write about my dream yesterday because I thought it was nothing. But now, I am so tired, but I can't close my eyes. Every time my eyes feel as though they can stay open no longer, the ghastly images flood back into my vision. How terrible they are. My dream tonight was the same as last, and I will never forget how it went. It starts with me in my room, and I am trying to fall asleep. It's all very eerie because it feels like I am still awake, lying in bed and experiencing insomnia. Just before I close my eyes and doze off, a clattering sound of breaking glass echoes down the hallway. My eyes flutter open, and I walk out into the hallway to find where the noise is from. But before I can reach the entry to the kitchen, another crash sounds. It doesn't come from the kitchen, so I continue to sweep through the rooms as I clutch my favorite blanket around my shoulders. After thoroughly searching every room for the culprit, I give up and go back to my room. But alas, this is where every fright comes into the story. I notice that my door is shut tightly when I come back, which is not how I left it. Now sweat seeps into my clothing. The house is suddenly very hot. So hot that I can't stand to have my protective blanket near me any longer. I frantically throw it onto the floor and decide to go into my room. I had the window open and it would certainly be cooler in there. I thrust my hand out and realized that now the door is slightly cracked open. I was certain that the door was fully shut only moments ago, and now it is slightly ajar. Nonetheless, I continue into my bedroom. It is almost too terrible to recall these dreams for you, but I will keep going so that you may all know what I am dealing with. The door squeaks an unnatural squeak, and it seems to open without me giving any sort of effort to push it. The window is still open, but the wind outside is stopped. It is very silent in the room, so silent that you can hear every soft step that I take. A dark shadow-like thing is spread across the floor in the corner of the room, flat as a piece of fabric. While keeping my eyes focused on the black thing, I shuffle slowly towards my bed. The room is very, very cold, and I wish that I had brought my blanket with me. The soft sheets of my bed are stiff and almost as cold as the rest of the room. I still pull the sheet over me, shivering and shaking. My eyes are still fixed on the big black shadow when, ding ding ding, dong, the alarm screeches so loud that my ears start to ring. My alarm clock is electronic, but in the dream it sounds like church bells. I am trying to stay focused on the black thing, but big, bright flashes of color erupt from the screen on the clock, which I can see out of the corner of my eye. I cannot help but let my eyes wander to the screen of the clock, leaving myself defenseless against whatever thing sat in the corner of the room. In a bold font, the device read, 12 o'clock. That's when I heard a sharp hiss and ripped my head back towards the shadow. The lights in the background faded, as did the loud noises. When my eyes finally adjusted to the new darkness, I could see it. The shadow was no longer stretched out flat. It stood big and menacing in the shape of a very tall and giant man. I could not notice any features due to the pure black that it was colored, which was much darker than any night sky. And as it stood there, I could hear it say, "The dark we come from, the dark we are. Come to look for us. You shall never be far. Your master calls." You can hear it hiss. The time has come. When we stab, we do not miss. And with that, the shape splits apart, starting from the feet and ripping last at the head. It multiplies itself until the room is filled with clones of the first shadow. Next thing I know, the room is enveloped with darkness, and my bed is no longer beneath me. The chant that the first thing uttered was now being sung by multiple wispy voices, and it became louder and louder. The black floor below me drops away, and even though I can no longer see, I can still feel my stomach come racing upwards and the air pummeling my skin. That's where the dream ends, but there is still one more important detail. Today and yesterday when I woke up, everything seemed normal, but the minute I woke up, the alarm clock next to my bed read 12:01. Despite my inability to slumber, I think this is where today's entry ends. Good night to you, but I believe that I will stay up and watch the news. It has to be better than whatever awaits me in my subconscious mind. April 2nd. Lord help me. I think I might be going insane. I am at work right now, but I am hiding this journal so that no one can see. As you know, I have been having these frightful terrors, but last night was the worst of all. Yesterday, I did as I said I would and spent the rest of the morning with the television on. The daytime went fine, but as nighttime rolled around, I sat in the living room of my apartment and decided that I would wait one more day before sleeping in my room. For a while, I sat there, but I couldn't stand to keep my eyes open any longer. I fell asleep, and just like that, I was back in the dream. It was almost the same as the last two, only the verses that the shadows sang were different. We know your soul, we were once you. The fear is present, we had that too. Your time is here. Do not resist. The master wants you. Just hold out your fist. But that was not the end of the night. When I read my watch, it said 12:01. But what troubled me was the temperature of the room. The thermostat said that it was 72 degrees Fahrenheit, but that could not have been right because it felt like an oven in there. And then I heard a crashing sound. Of course, it came from my bedroom, which had a tightly latched door that I did not remember shutting. Instead of investigating, I decided it would be best to simply wait out my time in the living room. The television was shut off, which was strange to me because I had never turned it off myself. I was so terrified by then that I was shaking all over and covered in all of the pillows and blankets that were on the couch. It was hot inside, but they were the only protection that I could find nearby. I used my trembling hand to switch the TV back on, and the night went on completely normally from that point on. So here I am now, sitting slumped over in my cubicle, keeping this diary hidden beneath me. Who knows what people would think of me if they read this? I have no idea what to think of myself now either, but I refuse to return to that house tonight. Instead, I asked to stay the night at my brother's home, which is only across the town from where I live. I hope that my next entry is a bit happier. April 4th. I don't know what time it is, but it's probably close to 1:30 in the morning. I don't think I will ever check the time again. I had to leave. I thought that this might be the way for my family to know what happened to me. Yesterday night, I returned home with the confidence that no bad dreams were going to haunt me today. I spent the night before at my brother's home, and everything went very well. I didn't have any dreams at all, so I thought it would be okay to return home and sleep the next night. I went home and fell asleep in my bedroom. And of course, I had the dream once more. Only when I woke up, it was just 11:09. I was paralyzed with fear, and I watched as the clock switched to 12 o'clock. My door flew open and smashed into the wall behind it. A huge black shadow, just like the one that was in my nightmare, flew through the door and started swelling up bigger. Its hissing voice was as loud as ever as it said, For times you have disobeyed. The Master wants you now, and you will come. The darkness in your soul is greater than others. You are destined to join us. Do not fight. This is what you are." And with that, it thrust its body forward and wrapped its slithering fingers around my neck. In a desperate attempt to hold myself in place, I reached for the bedside table just as the creature lifted me and tried to pull me towards the door. I slapped my hand down and a faint light appeared. The creature vanished as quickly as a hummingbird's wings can flap, and I was dropped to the ground. I realized that I had hit the top of my alarm clock, which had a button that shined a light to help you see. I left as quickly as I could. I am in a taxi right now on its way to the river. I plan to jump in. I just cannot be alive when this is what I am living with. I'm sure you can understand. Wait, now the car has stopped. The driver is not moving. He won't respond to me. The headlights just turned off. The whole car is shaking. Holy crap, when we stab, we do not miss.